I'd like to start today by introducing you to Levi. Levi here, he's been riding around the block for the last 30 minutes trying to gain the courage to go off a jump. And as he's riding around and around and around, he's getting a little bit of muster. He's feeling like he can really do something different. He notices that there's blocks on the side that he could actually add to it or not, so he decides to leave it as is. And then he goes up the hill, turns around, and makes his descent. So as he makes that descent down, there's that feeling of fear and exhilaration. He hits the jump, and as he enjoys the moment of victory that he's actually accomplished going off that jump, he then lands and fail. Who here has ever failed at anything? Okay, there's a few of us who are unwilling to admit it's amazing that you're perfect. I would love to learn from you. So failure is something that we're all familiar with, and today when we're talking about education, I want to tell you something a little bit different. I want to start a little differently. I actually want you to take about a minute and see if you can read this or decode this. So fitting for this morning's keynote, if you were there, you got to see some decoding happening. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to see who would be willing to maybe come up here and read that. All right, is there any takers on anyone willing to try to read that in front of everyone? I don't see any hands raised. So I'm gonna actually attempt to see if I can read it for you. Starting clear, oh look, there's my words right there. If you were dyslexic, it is designed to simulate the feeling of reading with dyslexia by slowing the reading time of the viewer down to a speed of which someone who has dyslexia would read. Does anyone here know anyone that has dyslexia? Is there anyone here that is dyslexic? So this, just for clarity, is not how dyslexics see the world. This is not how they read. However, for anyone who is not dyslexic, this is a way of being able to understand what is the day in the life of somebody who has dyslexia. What does that actually experience? Can you imagine reading a page like that? What about 100 pages? How about 1,000 pages in college? Depending on the week or weeks. That may feel overwhelming. What's going on in a dyslexic's brain is there are essentially 3 neural pathways, for those of you who didn't know this. And for dyslexics, what's unique is those dyslexics have 2 of the 3. The 2 that they have are remedial. The one that they're missing is called the express pathway. So it's essentially, think farm road and interstate. And it's retrieval. So they see a phoneme, they see the syllable, they see the word, as they put it all together, they have to sound out each phoneme. And believe it or not, you're actually doing that in hyperspeed with your express pathway. The other thing to note about the dyslexic versus the non-dyslexic brain is where all the activity is happening. This obviously is not a real representation because there's dots on a brain. But if you were to actually look at a brain scan while someone is reading who has dyslexia, you'll see a very specific area of the brain that is lit up and other areas of the brain that are lit up. When you look at somebody who is not dyslexic, they actually have more of their brain spending attention on that activity. Well, why does that matter? Well, it's because when you think about the dyslexic, not only is it the decoding piece, but the level of effort required, which is what you all were just doing, trying to decode that paragraph, the level of effort is exhausting. So another thing to know about dyslexics is that it represents around 15 to 20% of the population, of the US population. There are a healthy percentage of folks who are dyslexic that do not know that they are dyslexic, believe it or not. Another interesting statistic that I'll give you, which was from a poll, is that 80% of the population believes that those who have dyslexia have lower intelligence. So you may say, well, I'm not one of those, but you also may say, if you really were to investigate your own bias, and like if you've ever been in a conversation, or if you would you want, there's a great example of a video I've seen where they actually have a person going around in London asking folks, would they like a dyslexic baby? And the whole idea was they were going around and adamantly people were saying no. They're on the street, they don't know any of it, there's nothing to lose by saying no, there's nothing to win. But the point was, is as people were going around and hearing, would I choose for my kid to be dyslexic or not? The answer was absolutely no. So what's interesting about dyslexia is the way in which the brain operates in one fundamental activity of reading is challenging, though the way dyslexics actually think, generally speaking, is different. The way I like to describe it is the non-dyslexic generally learns in a linear fashion. There are prerequisites, there are things predicated to learn this, and you learn in a sequential order. In a really interesting way, what dyslexics can do is they can actually see, they can learn one thing about woodworking, one thing about business analytics, and another thing about swimming, and they will find a node that is similar. And there is a pattern recognition that they're able to identify. What's also fascinating to know is that NASA, 50% of their employees are dyslexic, and it has to do with the ability to solve problems. Though most of the world, in my experience, doesn't necessarily look at dyslexia as an advantage. You have a very forward-thinking organization who is actually validating that these folks are phenomenal problem solvers. My name is Jason Lockismo, and I'm a dyslexic. I didn't learn how to read until I was a senior in high school. I tried to hide as much as I possibly could the fact that I couldn't read. I didn't want anyone to know how bad it was. So most of my elementary education was essentially faking that I could be successful. And that was how I made progress, which for me was essentially a lie. Why I am passionate about this particular mission has to do with how do I help the Jasons of the world actually identify that they have an opportunity to grow and not be defined by this. In another way, school, you've all been there one way or another, and you've all failed in one way or another. And there's those topics, there's those concepts that you just couldn't get, or you didn't have enough time. And so how do we actually work towards a solution that is effective is so important. And part of my personal mission is, how do I help those Jasons of the world be successful? So with me today is Maureen Guccello, and she is a phenomenal collaborator. She and James Frazee, who are the folks that we worked with at San Diego State University, actually helped, we came together with a common problem. How do we help students? And the beginning of that problem was essentially, how do we identify here's a population of struggling students, what could we do to help them? But to get there, we actually had to, well, actually, let me tell you one thing about Pearson, which is interesting is, so Pearson, if you don't know what Pearson is a learning company. It's the world's learning company. It's the largest learning company in the world. And this year we actually moved to a digital-first strategy. And that digital-first strategy means there's only going to be that much more data flowing into our environments. There's that much more information about students that we might be able to actually identify new areas and new points of struggle. It also means that we're moving from a business that's been print dominated to print as a service, also taking those costs down and supporting students at a lower cost. But because of all of this, what I will say is it begins a certain kind of question and journey. And for us, that journey starts, for me, when I joined Pearson around Tableau, actually. For me, I fell in love with Tableau in 2009 because it was the first tool I was able to use to actually help me in the way that I think and process information, to actually bring it to life. I could actually tell a story, a narrative that folks could actually see what I had been seeing for that entire time. I could see it, I just didn't know how to communicate it. And now I could take 1 billion data points or 1 million data points or 10 data points, and I could present them in a way that told the story or allowed them to navigate their own story. And so I had experiences. So when I came to Pearson, I had this vision to be able to share and show what people could do, what the art of what was possible. The advantage that I also saw in this was I wanted to be able to bring analytics to everyone. I wanted to be able to do it in a way that scaled across the entire organization. Pearson is 25,000 people strong, and it's a lot of people doing a lot of different jobs in a lot of different spaces. And so how do we effectively do that? How do we do it at scale? How do we ensure that folks can make evidence-based decisions on a regular basis? And again, do that at scale. So my particular charter for product analytics was really around how do we transform learning and how do we do it across all levels? Pearson was a holding company. So you can imagine what that means from a technology standpoint. It had every stack known to man inside of its ecosystem. So when I joined Pearson in 2014, I realized that we had our work cut out for us. And what I mean by that is out of all of this learning experience and all of this learning data, we had access to essentially sales and registration information across all of our products. We had really limited ability to go and do true analysis. You could do analysis, but you would have to have the one data scientist or the one analyst who had the one set of access who were the gatekeeper to get access to it, and it just doesn't scale. That was for one problem. The way I describe it is when I joined Pearson, I asked all the right questions of all the wrong people, and because of that, what I didn't realize was how bad the environments were in terms of being able to deliver scalable analytics and insights across an organization. So we also had started building a product in Amazon, in S3, our new products that were being developed, and we had no way of actually assessing any of the information, any of the usage. So if anything, it was this black box, and there was all kinds of information being spewed into this that we had no ability to actually analyze. In 2015, I was able to get a commitment from the business to let me have 30 Tableau server licenses that I would then use to essentially promote this vision, this story of what if. Imagine a world where you could actually see where the problems were and take advantage of that, where you didn't have to wait on qualitative information, but you could actually make a sound decision on quantitative. What if I could tell you exactly which problems or which answers in a question across millions of questions were the most problematic? Based on the level of difficulty, what if I could do that across all of our content? What if I could find all the pockets of areas across our product experience where students are struggling, they just can't make it through for no reason at all other than there was some page not linked to another page. So that was where we wanted to go. And so I knew if I had to be able to show people how to get there, and Tableau was my means to an end. It was a way that I could really speak and show that narrative. So we launched it, and then as we move into 2016, we now had the ability to bring all of these disparate data and bring it into one environment. And that one environment was S3. And so we also were started to try different solutions that ultimately were not effective for the scale at which we were trying to run queries. We needed a capacity, and so the fortunate thing in working with AWS and working with Tableau and working with the engineering teams across Pearson is we recognized early we needed to have a modular approach. Not necessarily by design, but we realized that as things began to fail or not really work in the way that we thought they would. And so because of that, we started using the AWS marketplace and trying out various technologies that would allow us in these kind of small pilots. And what we ended up landing on was Redshift. And so Redshift would allow us to actually bring access. And what we also did is we then took that access to a larger base of people. And at the end of 2016, we were able to get server installed. So now we were able to take that vision to around 450 people in the product development organization and the content organization. Now we were actually able to bring something to life that was really at this point just a couple screenshots that were in a presentation that were distributed all around. In 2017, we then took that, we added Athena to our stack, and allowing us to, at a much lower cost, be able to effectively go and query a larger set of data. It also, what we did was we were able to distribute this out to around 1,700 people. So now it was about that culture that we've been hearing so much about. How do you adapt a culture to really looking to data first as a means to help you ask that next question? And so working with product management, working with the product marketing, working with the content teams, who all had very good questions, now is around what if you had access to being able to answer those questions? And so from there, what we ended up doing is, in this last year, we've actually now expanded to Snowflake, and as a technology and growing. What I will say though is, not only like in our national sales meeting that we had this year, Tableau was a common theme being used again and again across our entire sales force around a tool that's helping them. We now have essentially nearly 8,000 people across Pearson using Tableau as a way of being able to get access to information. We also have nearly, or just over 300 publishers from around 20-ish teams that are essentially publishing in their various narrative to help their various parts of the business. But as any good story, yes, we did it, we made it. And not only did we make it, but we wanted to take it further. So about a year and a half, I took on a different role at Pearson to really think about how might we extend this to customers? How might we actually enable our customers to see what they wanted to see? What if I could take, from a journey standpoint, there we go. What if I could actually show an institution their usage? What if I could show them their information? What if I could bring to life for them where students are actually struggling in the learning objectives, in the learning topics? And so what if I could actually tell you, so you may have a larger number of students enrolled, but you only have about half of those students actually using the courseware, using the homework, doing the review, doing the assessments. It's a beginning of a new indicator. What if I could take that and I could actually show you across particular disciplines and across various courses where there's struggle happening? What if I could show you across every aspect of that experience in each section of the material, not just that there's struggle, but under which learning objectives is the entire course struggling with? What if I could tell you that these folks, in this particular learning objective applied the multiplication counting rule, that those 39 students averaging a 68%, there's something maybe inherently correct about that, meaning it was by design difficult, or no, this is a common place that we actually need to be able to attack. What if you could then see the scale? You could see how many students are actually not just actually attempting it, but completing it. So then you begin to have a little bit more understanding of what was possible. But we don't want to leave it there, right? Because averages are so dangerous. You can see that courses, I was just showing you courses on learning objectives. I was showing you basically, if you sum everybody up, the average is 69%, or the average is 64%, or it's 40%. What I really want to be able to do is I want to help Jason. I want to be able to do something more powerful. And so again, going back to the statistics and being able to look at that, what if we could take those learning objectives, and I want to look at every course that had that learning objective inside of it, and I wanted to pick it apart. Well, now what I can do is I can see specifically which learning objective, which concept. I could even drill into the items, the question and the answers. But even here I can see the average may be 55%. But in fact, there are a few of these students who are probably either exceptional or they got it, but there's a healthy percentage of who isn't. And now I can act. This is where you take that dot that was described earlier in the keynote. Like, you can actually zero into something that's very meaningful. And so for us, that was the beginning of how can we then take this to customers or institutions that might be able to use that information. And so about a year and a half ago, I started working with Maureen. And come on up, Maureen. And Maureen is with San Diego State University. And as we began this journey, it was really about investigating the very information I was just showing you. And Maureen found a new opportunity. So,
hi, everyone. So my name is Maureen Garcello, and I'm the Research, Analytics, and Communications Specialist at San Diego State University. I work in instructional technology services. So within our large public undergraduate heavy population of about 35,000 students, I work within the instructional technology space and the information technology division. And my job is to look at this courseware, to look at the student path, to look at the digital breadcrumbs that students are leaving behind, but also to try to forecast the student's potential at the course level and also at the student level. So that's a little bit about me and our institution. Now, this is what I really do. I have been studying this red dot for 4 years. This is our student success exploration and analytics dashboard. This is open for the university to be able to access and drill down on courses across the institution, to look at admissions data, all of the data that you would really want to explore at a high level at the institution. But my job is to look at student success and try to use analytics to help correct or to change the course of students' overall performance. This red dot represents about over 500 students in their first or second year at the institution who fail an introductory statistics course or receive a D in the course. So how many of us nailed introductory statistics? Nailed it. Asa nailed it. Of course, Asa nailed it. We've got a data scientist up here. How many, if you care to share, failed introductory statistics the first time you took it? No one? So this is a lesson in selection bias. I knew this was coming. All right, so at San Diego State University, this introductory statistics course for business, pre-business majors is a major problem. And it's also a persistent problem. Since I've been studying the big red dot, students have been failing in the 20s, mid-20s, high 20s, and have to retake the class. So what's interesting about this is that we have done so much to try to intervene, to try to help these struggling students. This is not for lack of trying. We've tried intervening with supplemental instruction. We have a math stats learning center. We've had great relationships and looked at course design with faculty, and nothing. But now SDSU has a deadline, okay? Graduation Initiative 2025 is here. The freshman class right now are these students, and the state of California and the CSU system as a whole, all 23 campuses, are responsible for meeting and exceeding these specific goals. So now we've got a deadline, and we need to move these students along, not just because it's in our hearts, but also because it's our bottom line at this juncture. So here's our problem. You know about these students in the stats class. We have here a student, she loves statistics. So she enters the class, she does all of the activities. So from the student, from the user perspective, she's got the whole story. She knows what she's doing at home, she knows what time she's doing it, she knows how often or not often she's doing her homework. She knows how she's doing on her exams for the most part. Half of that information is going to Pearson, and half of that information is going to San Diego State University. And so both of us, for a long time, have been very pleased and able to leverage the information that we had. San Diego State University knows how the story began and how it ended, and Pearson has a lot of the chapters in between in this specific stats course. So this statistics course, as Jason mentioned, uses a digital text, and then they also use the courseware called MyStatLab. So when Jason came forward with ASA and the Pearson team and proposed a partnership to share these data, to explore these data, and to get a better sense of how to forecast more intelligently with a bigger part of the story, student success or potential in the course, with the opportunity to intervene, we were really excited. I have to mention this. For any of you who might have college-age children, or just in terms of protecting your own data, we upheld every potential possible standard you could possibly uphold going into this process. The Asilomar Convention for Instructional Technologists got together in 2014, and they set up 6 principles, which include respect, Beneficence, so the study, the research has to be, for the better good, do no harm. Justice, openness, the humanity of education, which is really what this study is about. What is the human experience for the student? And then constant consideration or iterative process. This is the Family Educational Rights and Protection Privacy Act, and then also secure data transfers. Okay, so I'm going to go through this next section kind of quickly.
You're doing great.
What we had been doing at San Diego State was forecasting students' performance. We were quite chuffed with ourselves using their prior performance. So we would take their midterm grade and then forecast how they might ultimately do in the course. And then we were really pleased because it was all we really had to work with, other than the students' SIS or demographic data, to get a sense of how they would do in the course. We stopped doing that. You can't change who you are. You can't change your socioeconomic status when you cross the threshold to the university. You can't reverse that. But what you can do is help students monitor or understand their own behavior and then change that. So that's what we did. Our goal was to take activity or engagement data with a homework platform and help to change the student's behavior. So here's what we came up with. We used a k-means clustering algorithm. Asa, our amazing data scientist, helped work through with one of our graduate assistants. And we found that there are 4 types of students in this class. You have early compliant students. So these are your rabbits, these are your go-getters. These are students who are starting their homework, which, by the way, was one of only 2 metrics we used to predict the student's ultimate behavior in this class. When the student engaged with their homework, so 5 or more days out, you've got your rabbits, they're off, they're running, they're happy to be. You've got your compliant students. So these students are like, okay, I have to do the homework. I'm gonna get to it a little bit early and get done with it. Late compliant, just in time. Those are your night owls. Those are students just cramming to get it done, and then your non-compliant. So you've got your turtles. For whatever reason, they are not engaged in the homework, okay? Here's the interesting thing about this class. You don't have to do the homework to pass the class. It's only worth 10% of the overall grade. Okay, so why would clustering these students and being able to predict as early as week 2 with more than 50% accuracy which of these clusters students would ultimately land in? And this is why. Early compliance students, again, this is behavioral, not performance-based, are 2 times more likely to pass the class. That's actually early compliant and compliant students. And then our late compliant and non-compliant students, while many of them did pass the class, far fewer of them were able to. And that has a lot to do with their engagement. So we have this opportunity now to drop in to help students based on this clustering approach, which is very different than the way we had been doing things in the past. And to be able to hopefully engage with those students, communicate with those students, let them know that if you start your homework 3 days out, you have 3 additional days to come up with a question, ask a friend, talk to a faculty member, go to the MathStats Learning Center. And eventually, with this informed action, the little red dot, the big red dot, will be the student on the ground, shaking her scarf, her stole, to get her parents, her families, everyone's attention, because she was ultimately successful. And I have Pearson to thank for a lot of that.
Well, I think one thing that we probably want to talk a little bit about is coming back to this process of identifying students. Find it. You've got an area where you're not only not using grades, you're also abstracting what is considered profiling data. Right? You're taking away. So maybe take a minute.
Sure. So, there's this self-fulfilling prophecy. When I talk about my work, not just measuring the big red dot or the work that I do at the university, there are a lot of things that come up for people: protecting their data, who owns the data, is it fair to create a self-fulfilling prophecy for a student? And that's why we look to health prevention communication, we uphold our security standards, and really at the root of it, at the core of it, we wanted to push out any kind of race, gender, age, even commuter students. Commuter students are successful at our institution, and we have an overwhelming population of commuter students. We have an overwhelming population of veteran students, returners, degree completers who took a long break in between. And we wanted to push all of that out of the picture. Does that help address that?
Well, and I think in addition to that, it's pushing it out, but also you're no longer isolating people to their zip code. You're not isolating them to their normal profiles of how you would identify their probability of success, but you're saying, I mean, essentially what was able to happen is we were able to look at just behavioral information and say, you have a behavioral profile, and based on that behavior, which whether it be compliant, early compliant, non-compliant, we can take some actions that are specific to those areas, not having to knowing anything about you, but just based on how you're interacting.
Yeah, and I call it looking at the whole student. You know, now we're looking at the whole student. And what's interesting about this class, while for many students it's a pre-business requirement, pre-business major requirement, for other students it's just a GE. So if you've ever heard, you know, C's get degrees, sometimes even D's get degrees, students might not be focusing their efforts in this specific class. They might be looking to their other actual pre-major courses, maybe introductory psychology is their number one priority, and they're gonna spend all the time that they need to be able to, you know, read that material, engage in that class. And that's why it's also really important to not just have this pan-student approach when you're looking at the data, to be able to actually focus it on the course level and then intervene, but to hopefully keep them going.
Well, and that's been part of the joy for us, has been able to see, so traditionally in higher education, I should ask, how many folks here are actually from higher ed? Okay. So then for the majority, we're all pretty familiar with the struggle that our students face. And in some form or fashion, we've all been a student. And when you think about how do you affect change, how do you actually enable somebody to take a different path, you can predict all you want and you can see what that outcome will be. It's the ability to change that outcome in a meaningful way. And I think that's for me on a personal level, how do I find the Jasons out there who may be getting a B in the class, but I'm spending an inordinate amount of time or effort. So the way that might show up is, it might show up as in my behavior is showing Jason took, let's say 5 hours on something that everybody else in the class took 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. Well, if I'm struggling to read, yes, I was able to finally get it, but then what are the implications for my other 3 or 4 courses, right?
And at the course level, we look at that, and these were some of the downfalls of using the learning management system data, was that we had what I would call make a sandwich time, right? So you would see that some students were taking 20 minutes to complete an assignment that was actually hosted on Blackboard or Canvas, you know, whatever your learning management system is. Then you'd see these weird outliers. It's like, 7 hours. It's like, well, was that student really working, engaging in that material? If so, we have a much bigger problem to address. Or did the student start the assignment and walk away, go make a sandwich, go to the gym, you know, carry on with their life? With the Pearson data and being able to look at these engagement data, we're able to just kind of push that data out, and we don't have to rely on it as much. Is that me? That's my timer. All right. So that's what we did. That's how we did it, and we're really excited to move forward with some other ways of intervening and trying to help support those students by communicating with them. But further than that, we really want to scale this. So I am an N of 1. I serve a population of 35,000. And through these partnerships, we're able to leverage our data and try to make more intelligent decisions and do it all in service of and in support of our students. So.
Let me ask you a question to the audience. How many of you would say if you're with an institution, how many of your institutions would you say are apt and able to take advantage of data and analytics? They have a mature analytics program. So I've had an opportunity in the last, I like that, exactly. So I've had the chance over the last almost 2 years now, I've talked to nearly 200 institutions. And in the conversation of really trying to understand what it is that they're trying to solve. So my role at Pearson is business development. What that really is R&D. How do we take that data and those analytics and extend it to the institution? And now we're finding ways in which we can do that. And what I've found along the way is that many of these institutions have the desire. And not only do they have the desire, fundamentally they have the context and they have the culture that a third party like myself would never have. So giving me that information from their end isn't as useful or helpful because there's still so much I won't ever know. So what we've been exploring is how can we as Pearson actually end up really extending to the institution, not just the data, because though that was the first thing I got when I got into this space was just give me the data. And so in doing so, what we found was that wasn't actually helpful because of whether it's in JSON format or the sheer volume of it, folks didn't understand what they were asking for. And that was nothing wrong on their part. They admittedly needed the information, but it wasn't just needing the information, they needed it in a way they could actually use it. And so what we're now starting to do is how do we take this information and actually deploy it to institutions? So what we're working on now, it's coming soon, is essentially, and this is in flight now, is how can we essentially front load the data that is relevant to these institutions in a way where they can take advantage and harness the analysis aspect versus having to be the data architect or be the data SME or really be the folks who are all of those things. And or you're not part of the CIO organization, you're in the academic side of the organization and you're not able to get the help that you need. Mm-hmm. And in those cases, what we've been doing is we're working with folks to essentially arm them and the CIO part of the organization to essentially be able to have a bridge strategy. How do we actually help folks get to the core need? The core need is we want to be able to help students. And we know that Pearson is only one provider. There's multiple providers and solutions. And so the idea being, how can you then extend that to other, so the school owns and operates because they have the culture, they have the context, they just don't have all the data expertise. And so that's what we're embarking on now is, so we've identified these things that can scale, so what? If you can't take an action that is material, I mean, you can still take an action, but if it doesn't result in a material intervention or a materially different outcome, again, so what? Data isn't meaningful unless you can put it into a meaningful action. And so, for me, the theme in all of this has been, I want to be able to find all of the Jason Lockismos in the world in some form or fashion, or do my part in enabling them to know that they actually have what it takes. Because our students, your kids and or yourself, as you begin to struggle, there are voices in the world screaming or yelling or just loud enough saying you're never going to be able to do it. And some of those, the loudest voices are your own. Going through school knowing that I wasn't able to read or that I struggled, that I didn't know how to, like getting to a question or that God forbid somebody, we had a round robin reading and they would come to me and I'd have to be able to read to the rest of the class this one paragraph. How do we help those students who already feel insecure and or stupid, or in other ways they have other challenges? How do we help those students actually be successful? It's not by having these big numbers and being able to say this class. It's about being able to say to Levi, to Olin, to Luella, to Jason, to Angie, here are all the things that we can do for you individually where you're struggling. And I think that's, for me, the next branch of learning analytics. For those of you who are exploring learning analytics, it's not just about engagement. It's really around how do we change that.
And Jason, I would add, the voices that get louder and louder, like your own voice saying that you can't do it, getting louder and louder throughout the semester, I believe can be quieted by 2 weeks in having a communication that says, hey, you're doing a great job, keep on going, or hey, think about starting your homework a little bit earlier. Students who were you last semester were 2 times more likely to pass this class when they just added an additional day to their homework prep before it was due. And to be able to do that with so much accuracy, so many weeks before the first assessment is even administered, will help quiet those voices in my hopes and dreams.
Well, I think, and that's the part for in one way or another, we all will continue to fail. And it's in those failures that we have the option to choose to either grow as part of that failure or be defined by part of that failure. And I think what we're, in that scenario where you're actually arming students with, students like you who did this activity were 2 times as more likely to be successful or pass this class, that's meaningful, because that's also relatable, right? So anyway, for me, this is where a certain level of passion comes out and excitement. What I do want to articulate too is that this world of analytics is evolving so fast that you have to be able to partner with folks who are actually nimble and agile enough to do that with you. And one of the challenges that I faced early on with some of the antiquated systems that we had is that they just aren't malleable enough. Because the questions on the other end, so all of the questions on the learning space, they're meaningful because they're at the student level, but in the end you have to be able to get all that data into a shape that will allow you to answer the question. And so when you think about the sheer volume of data that's coming, let alone that's already available, it's how do you do that? How do you shape it? How do you consume it? And then how ultimately do you show the story, right? So we've shown a couple examples, and I'm sure many of you have your own examples, but really what I found to be most effective in my career has been able to show people what's going on versus telling people what's going on. And so I would like to say thank you for your time. Before we get to Q&A, I would like to ask that you take a minute and open up your app and begin the evaluation. Feedback is a gift. And I say that not necessarily tongue-in-cheek. If we want to hear your thoughts, we want to know what it is that you liked, what it is that was helpful, what ultimately wasn't helpful, what you would have wanted to learn more about. So if you can do that for us, that would be, we would really be thankful for that.